It just created a plethora of issues, a domino effect that nobody could have foreseen happening. Did you really think it was going to be this bad? And the answer is no. I mean, I'm being honest with them. No, it was hard, Les. It was really hard to comprehend and to kind of just come down and take it all in and be able to talk to people about it, and still it's difficult. Like even talking to you right now, I go back and I relive everything, and it's like PTSD is a legitimate thing, and we all have it. We all have that.
I'm talking with Jason Boyer, who is the chief meteorologist at our sister station, WLOS in Asheville, North Carolina. Jason, reason why I wanted to talk to you is obviously we had our issue here in 2018 with Hurricane Florence.
And it is continuing to curve a little bit. As we told you earlier, we had to evacuate our building, and now we're being told that our sister station in Myrtle Beach is going to continue our coverage so that we can continue the evacuation of this building because of the rising water. So we're going to take you now to the coverage from our sister station in Myrtle Beach.
You've now had it out there with Helene. I assume this is probably the worst weather event you've ever been in, correct?
Absolutely, hands down the worst natural disaster, really the only natural disaster that I personally experienced while in the business.
So walk me through it. With both of us being scientists, we know how the models can all go back and forth, the windshield wiper effect, if you will. But what did you start thinking when you first saw what potentially could have unfolded there in the western part of the state?
Well, the first thoughts are, we always are taught in meteorological school that models are always wrong, but some are useful, right? And in that sense, we certainly had hoped that they were going to be wrong in this standpoint, because we just didn't want them to be as accurate as they actually turned out to be, in a sense that we didn't want that kind of rain. Obviously, we knew what it was going to likely do. It was likely going to create catastrophic flooding. And when you put words like catastrophic, devastating into the equation and the messaging, it really changes your whole idea of how you approach that messaging from a daily basis, getting the word out to folks, especially now in the day of social media and how pervasive that is.
So once the storm was actually going and you were having the actual flooding issues around there, speaking of social media, was that the only real way that you had to be able to get your information disseminated out with all the flash flood warnings and everything, the river cresting information, once people started losing their power?
Yeah, once power started going out, we really tried to utilize social media as much as possible. However, we had a double whammy. We had power loss pretty much area wide, and we had cell phone loss area wide. And that not only handicapped us from getting messaging out, but handicapped the emergency responders. They were going back to the old school CB radios and trying to get two ways to work without any cell phone communication. So it just created a plethora of issues, a domino effect that nobody could have foreseen happening.
So how did you change or adapt the way that you disseminated your information? Or more importantly, I assume you guys still had internet and power at the station, but that was about all you had, right?
Yeah, we lost water, we lost power for a while. The backup generators kicked in. There was a point when I had talked personally to an engineer who thought we were going to run out of diesel fuel for the generator in a matter of a. And so we were scrambling to get a supply of diesel fuel to the station. But luckily enough, the section of town that our station is located in restored power in a matter of maybe at tops 24 hours. Okay. We were out of power, and most people weren't going to get power for at least a week or more. So before the power loss occurred, it was my shift. So I'm the evening meteorologist, and I was getting all the information out as quickly as we could about the upcoming event.
And now your News 13 Skywatch weather. Well, based on what I'm seeing, it looks like we will have a landfalling hurricane around Perry, Florida, and it's going to be coming on shore any minute. So we're going to call this an official landfall, 11:15 this evening, Perry, Florida, with 140-mile-per-hour winds. We'll get the official number coming up in just a second because right now they're just waiting to put that out on the National Hurricane site. So we're going to wait for that.
And granted, we had only a few flash flood warnings issued on my shift prior to the main event happening, which was Helene's arrival overnight that Thursday night into that Friday morning. It was actually maybe about an 8 to 10 hour window of the worst of it. And just on top of everything else, it was the straw that broke the camel's back.
This storm is far from over. Historic flooding, high winds, and more heavy rain are expected as Helene makes its way to the mountains. This morning had a bit of a power blip right there. But once again, historic flooding, high winds, heavy rains expected as Helene continues to make its way into the mountains.
If I remember, you guys had like the synoptic, it was like a stalled front across the area there, right? Initially, it had rained already a day or two ahead of time.
Yeah, they call it the predecessor rain event, or PRE, was essentially 2 days worth of record rainfall before Helene's main bands got here. And that was something unprecedented. We had never had back-to-back days of record rainfall, let alone 3. And we had 3 in a row, which was unheard of.
Wow.
Yeah, 3 record daily rainfall. And it ended up being, I think, the end-all, be-all total at the Asheville Regional Airport, where the official number is kept, was somewhere around 14 inches in those 3 days.
Wow. So obviously you didn't grow up there. You've been there for what, about like a decade or so?
I'm going on 16 years in October, so just over,
okay.
15.
So you and I are about the same because I came here in January of 2009.
Yeah.
So how did you combat it never happened before, or I survived this tropical system? I made it through.
The first thing that my news director and I discussed was, what is an analog? Meaning, what is something that has happened similarly before that we can compare this to? And of course, the more recent memories were Francis and Ivan. Those 2 systems in 2004 came through here before I had become chief. But I was in Chattanooga at the time that happened. And so I wasn't very far from this market. And I remembered the amount of rain that the Chattanooga, the Tennessee Valley got, and how much flooding there was on the Tennessee River. And that back-to-back storm situation created big flooding here. But it was nothing on the scale of this system. So we had that first. Then you had to go all the way back to 1916, which is known as the Great Flood. And there, obviously wasn't a lot of building here, and the population was minuscule compared to what it is now. But there was documentation in the annals of history on that flood. So we had to use that. We gathered some pictures from a public library and put those on air saying, here's some photos, courtesy of the Historical Society. This is what it looked like in 1916 when it was a historic flood. This one's going to rival that. And that's kind of how we started out.
Wow.
But you're right, Les. You're right. I mean, people weren't alive then, though. That's the other thing is most people I'm talking to, if not everybody, wasn't alive then. So there wasn't a fresh memory of that. So we had to tell everyone that this is going to be likely worse than that. It's certainly going to be worse than the 2004 back-to-back Ivan Francis. It is likely to be as bad or worse than the 1916 flood. And then we had to go through the whole, we didn't have the population. There weren't as many people living along these rivers back then. So, things have changed. We've paved over surfaces. We have impervious surfaces like roads and parking lots and all this runoff now to consider. Mathematically, you could do a hydrological analysis and know this is going to be a disaster.
Your population had no basis to be able to have the comprehend of what could happen.
No. And the unfortunate thing is, with the modeling that we had from the hydrological standpoint, those inundation maps that you looked at before, obviously with Florence and everything else, they were only showing inundation out to a 500-year event. this was greater than 1,000-year event. So we couldn't even really visualize how much the water was going to go beyond the 500-year. We knew it was going to be, let's say, twice as much, right? Well, that's a rough estimate, but is that enough to determine, people are going to have to leave a mile away from the river or 2 miles away from the river? That was an unknown.
So as the crew, the news crews are out gathering the information and then being live as long as they could before they had to evacuate or even lost power or cell service. When you saw some of the destruction that was coming into the newsroom, what were you thinking?
Well, the first visualizations I had of the destruction or the power of the water and how much volume we were talking about was watching the live hits in the morning of Helene's arrival. So it was dark until about, it's late September, so the sun's rising not until like 7 o'clock. And so it was dark until then. And our show starts at 4:30 in the morning. So I had gotten back up at about 5:30 in the morning after only getting about 3 hours sleep the night before. And I turned on the TV and I noticed that it was already happening, right? Well, then we lost power maybe 40 minutes after that at my house.
Oh, wow.
So I gotten a glimpse of some of the water movements and the live shots. I mean, we had reporters as, close to, but as safe from the flooding as we have. And I do remember one line from a reporter, Gracie, one of our morning reporters, that said, "We've already moved up twice. They're asking us to move again further uphill and away from the river." And that was down in the Biltmore Village area, which is a terrible place for flooding because it flooded badly during Francis and Ivan, but it was already becoming greater than that at that point. So that's when the scale of it started hitting me. And I also looked out my window and I remember, because it was still dark out, seeing power flashes. And it was happening, I could count them, every few seconds I would see a flash, a transformer going. And I was just sitting there going, oh no, the wind is another issue. I'm like, the wind is obviously going to be a major problem too.
Did you guys end up being able to go wall to wall?
Essentially, our morning meteorologist, Megan, and I were the only two on the weather staff at that time. We had, it was not a planned thing, obviously. So we were down a meteorologist because we were had one of our meteorologists take another job somewhere else. So we were hiring, and on top of that, our weekend meteorologist for the evenings had planned a international trip, months before Helene, before we even knew Helene was going to happen. She didn't know, and she was in Japan, and there was no way to get her, obviously, messaging to get back or anything like that. It was impossible. And by the time she would have gotten back, it would have been past the event already. But
yeah.
So we were basically trying to do wall to wall with what we had. The power hits, the power surges kept happening during the morning show. And I was able to go back and look at the morning show's air checks retrospectively and see how many times the power just kept going on and off. And it was maybe a dozen during the 3 hours they were able to broadcast. And then after that, we didn't know. And even Megan, our morning meteorologist, was telling me after the storm, I didn't know who was listening. I couldn't even tell you if I was reaching anybody because we just kept hearing about all the power outages, at least. And you just have to keep going, like somebody is obviously watching. You can't just give up and say, we're done. We're just going to have to rely on, people hearing it from word of mouth, or you can't do that. So we were playing it as if we had our audience still, even though we probably lost 90% plus of it.
Well, that's kind of what we saw here with Florence. We had to get out of here. We out of the studio about like 7 in the evening. It wasn't until my chief engineer said, I don't know, it was like midnight Thursday night going into Friday morning when it was at its worst. But like you said, you still had to keep going because we had people that were following us on social and as much as they could, or, even the ones that had evacuated. They were getting up and trying to tune in to our streaming service and everything. It's one of those situations where you've got to let it play out. You just don't know who's watching.
Yeah, and we were told retrospectively that people from out of the state and internationally were actually watching us, which was something that we, never thought in the back of our minds. We were thinking trying to get the local impacts out to the people living here. But I was told by my family and other people that have since come and gone, and they said, look, we we were watching you guys because you were the only source of the immediate information on at ground zero what was going on. So they were watching from somewhere else.
Wow. Yeah, we do this as a public service, but it's at least nice to know you're getting the information out.
Yeah.
Did you, as far as like weather data, have a lot of gaps in your data or not?
Not a lot of gap because the power was restored so quickly. I'm sure the computer didn't like the idea. The entire system didn't like the idea of getting cycled every time the power would go down. I was a little worried about frying the computer, if you will. So, but it never failed. Our data kept coming, and we were able to continue to broadcast and use the graphic system. So that was good.
So once you realized the scope of what was going on and what you were dealing with there, how were you able to mentally handle it? Like, look, things we knew are completely gone, just wiped off on the map.
Well, like I said, I'd never experienced a natural disaster personally like this. So it's very difficult, and you've seen destruction from flooding, and flooding is really the worst. I know people, because of tornadoes, they're dramatic, and hurricanes are dramatic from the wind, but it's always, you always are told afterward, the wind did some damage, but it was the storm surge or the flooding that did more damage and unfortunately created more loss of life. And I think that when I finally started wrapping my brain around the scope of it, the scale, and just how much was devastated, it was hard, Les. It was really hard to comprehend and to kind of just come down and take it all in and be able to talk to people about it, and still it's difficult. Like even talking to you right now, I go back and I relive everything, and it's like PTSD is a legitimate thing, and we all have it. We all have that.
Yeah. I mean, to this day, we're coming up on 7 years for us now? I was a morning guy. I was sleeping. I had to wake up. We evacuated. I know exactly where I was when the order came for us to be able to bug out. It was kind of a blur after that. It was about 12 to 18 hours until we all finally started reconstituting back together. And I know exactly what I saw out and about when I was out there surveying the area. From a meteorological standpoint, it was like I had to do this kind of almost self-evaluation, sort of like, look, I got the word out. I can't make people do this, but I did the best I could. But yet, again, I still, as a scientist, I was like, okay, well, can we improve it? I assume you guys have done that same kind of thing within your organization. What were our strengths? Where were our weaknesses? Should this happen again down in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, I've evaluated and reevaluated this over and over again with my team, with my news director, and I still, I mean, it's just in our nature, Les, that we hope that everyone is listening, and we hope that everyone grasps the situation, especially when it's this life-threatening. But we also have to understand that human beings, in our nature, we don't always make the best decisions. And it is unfortunate that, a lot of times the mantra in people's minds is, this, as bad as they say it is, it's just not going to be that bad. It's probably going to be better than they say it is. It's probably not going to be that bad, or it can't happen to me, and I'm okay. It's never flooded here before, and we're going to be fine. And it's okay to have that maybe mindset, because we all want to feel comforted somewhat, even though it's going to be a really disastrous situation. But making people realize that no matter what your mind is trying to tell you, it's probably a good idea to err on the side of caution no matter what, and leave or prepare for the flooding, and just be ready for loss of power, an extensive loss of power, or possible loss of water too. I mean, and the thing is like, people will ask me all the time, did you really think it was going to be this bad? And the answer is no. I mean, I'm being honest with them. No, we could not have imagined that we were going to be without power for months on end in place, or that the water system, Asheville's water system, a population of 100,000 people, would lose drinkable water for a month or more than that. It was like a month or more before anything was usable and potable for the city. And they had to rebuild so much infrastructure. And that's something that you just cannot see. Now, retrospectively, you're like, okay, now we know. So it's a learning experience from the public standpoint and from our standpoint as scientists.
Yeah, that was actually the biggest thing for us here in Eastern North Carolina, trying to, figure out how we could cover it. It was like, look, we didn't lose infrastructure. You there in Western North Carolina, you lost the infrastructure out there.
Yeah.
Because even our news director said, oh, yeah, we'll send a crew out there to help. I said, no, I don't think you're going to be able to get there because of the infrastructure damage.
Yeah. And the key to that, Les, is obviously geography. I mean, we have so many different elevation here because of the mountains and foothills, and everything has to run downhill. It has to get to the low point. The water is going to find the least path of least resistance, right? Like electricity does. And it's just going to find it. And you can't stop it from doing that. I mean, you could have built the Hoover Dam before this event, and it probably wouldn't have held it. It would have, I'm just saying, like, from a weird analog, could you build a dam and just build it up? No, you can't. I mean, because every tributary, every stream, every creek that leads into the main stems, and we have many rivers, they all had to flush into that main stem. And it wasn't just the rivers that flooded. It was every creek, every little babbling brook. They became torrents. And that's something that nobody was prepared for.
Have they started talking about, obviously the hydrology has changed. One, these rivers and everything now, have they gone through and started talking about how they're going to remodel them and put them into the equations to be able to forecast them going forward?
Yeah, it's a monumental task. It's just going to take years to do that because you have so many landslides. The earth moved in so many different locations. USGS has documented over 2,000 landslides. Wow. And some of the, did wipe out a half of a hillside or push down into the riverbeds, and they had to move that earth. And so, yes, and I drive to school for my son. I take him to work or school every day. And I have to drive by what is Cane Creek. He goes to Cane Creek Middle. So Cane Creek is typically this peaceful, idyllic thing going through farm pastures. And it's like the Grand Canyon. It ate so much and eroded away so much. The river is 3 times or more wider than it was. The creek, I should say. I call it a river now because it's that wide. And it rerouted itself. And that's just one example of all the others that did that. So the Army Corps of Engineers, the USGS, FEMA, the hydrological folks with NOAA, they all have to do the same kind of work and collaborate to get the modeling back or up to the new standard. And it's just going to take a long time. And that's one of my biggest fears, Les, is that when we get another flash flood event, which we're going to, right? It's in the middle now. It's the heavy rain season here. And if we get any kind of flash flood event, I and my team now have this unknown of where's the water going to end up going sometimes, right? You had these rerouting of creeks and streams. Well, what was normally going to be the floodplain or the flood area might have changed, or there might be, and there still is, debris that's sitting on the edges of the banks that they haven't gotten yet. And that's just going to block the flow or impede it. And you have all these unknowns right now. It raises the anxiety level a lot, I'll tell you that.
And I totally agree. So what did it feel like under the spotlight, or not just the national, but international media?
I didn't really think a lot about what that was doing while I'm doing my job. I mean, you see crews, and again, I wasn't able to get to a lot of these disastrous areas because they were already blocked off and the roads were washed out. So I wasn't physically able to personally go walk and see the damage until maybe a few weeks afterwards. So now that I have seen it, yes, it's mind blowing, and it will never leave me, right? I'll always have these memories until my end of days. And so I think that having the help was immense, and that we saw such a response internationally and and from local communities and like yourselves, and the support from across the entire globe, really, coming here was so helpful and impactful, and it made people hopeful that we could get back on our feet sooner rather than later. But it's still, still months afterward, and not everything's back to normal.
So how did this change not only your weather forecasting department, but also your news organization internally?
Well, we now realize that a disaster of this scope is something that would require much more help, in terms of trying to get crews in and cover something like this. I think that there's nothing we could do much differently if we had a situation like this happen again, where we lost power, number one, and lost communications with cell phones. That put us in a black hole, because you say, and we always talk about, hey, we're streaming. Don't, if we lose you on TV, we're streaming, go on your phones. Well, you couldn't even open up your cell phone and get on the internet and open up anything. I mean, apps were useless in most cases. So it was just, it was the domino effect, and a disaster on top of disaster. We had the flooding, then the wind, and that, I think the wind did a lot of knocking out communications along with the water. I think wind was a big issue. We had a lot of trees, hundreds of thousands of trees came down in this area, which most people would think, you don't have any trees left. Well, we have trillions of trees. So, we have a lot of trees left, but a big chunk of them, yeah, they came down.
So from the broadcast side of things, you guys all have live views, right? Do you have any microwave drops? At least those were one old school technology that you could have relied on, or at least got some kind of broadcast signal out.
We do, but I mean, it's a rarity that we ever use them. I can't tell you from that standpoint, Les, logistically, how many we used. I know we have a couple of microwave trucks still left, but that's probably the lot of them. That's it. We still have an old satellite truck, and I don't even know if that thing would even go anymore. I don't know how long it's been since it was maybe retrofitted to help or do anything, but it's there. But you're right. Old school, like I said, the communications for the emergency management, listening to what they had post-storm, was we were on CB radio. We were on two-way walkie-talkie. We were trying to do all this stuff, and some of those didn't work either. Like the two-way radios were ineffective in some places. It was like the dark ages, as they say.
Which forecast office are you guys with out there?
It's Greer, where the airport's located. Greer,
Okay.
South Carolina, in between Spartanburg and Greenville.
Have you guys got with the Interactive Weather Service team and said, hey, this is what worked, this is what didn't work?
They reached out with a survey, and we did fill out, their questionnaire. And yes, we addressed the issues with the communications. They realized it too. I mean, they were like, we're going to ask this question, but we know that you didn't have communication. So this may be irrelevant to ask, like, were you able to get warnings? Were you able to get things disseminated? And like I said, our computer system never went down. So yes, we were able to get warnings out and send them to our cell phone membership services and our weather app and our news app and everything. But again, who's getting them?
Did you ever get any feedback from your viewers that said, I was with you for this time until I lost power?
A lot of them were saying, look, we lost you early on in the morning of Friday, the 27th of September. That was when the communication and the power went out very quickly. It was not a big gap. I mean, it was either you lost power and then the towers went down almost simultaneously. But okay. I will tell you that I did do on Wednesday. I went on Facebook and did what you see meteorologists do to really focus on what the messaging is. So I went on and I was standing in my yard and I was just in my morning clothes to take my kid to work and like a baseball t-shirt and shorts, and I said, look, I want you to understand, please understand this is going to be something that I personally have never had to experience, and many will not have ever experienced. It will be worse than Ivan and Francis. It'll likely rival the all the messaging we had talked about earlier. Yep. And I said, I just urge people to be prepared for the worst and hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. This is going to be catastrophic flooding. That word, what does that mean to you? Does that mean, oh, should I leave? And it's like, most places you probably should, leave before the water comes. And it's going to happen quickly. And, we've had record this, it's going to be a record this. And I was telling them how much the forecast river stages were going to get to. They were going to be 10 or more feet higher than the flood stages that were the record stages. And I'm like, this is something that it's hard for me to understand it. So you have to understand. I'm worried. I'm really worried, and that's what people told me in retrospect, that they remembered they didn't do anything until they saw that. They're like, well, we weren't going to do anything. We just thought it was going to be kind of the typical flooding. We've had some floods before, but when we saw you do that on Facebook, we said it's going to be really bad.
Okay, you were within that 40-hour window for them to be able to take the measurement. Did any of the hydro sites survive to be able to record those record crests?
They did. Most of them did, actually. And there was one that I was suspect on, and it was it was down here close to where I live. It was the gauge near the airport, near the Asheville airport on the French Broad River in Fletcher. And it was forecast to hit 30 something, a little over 30 feet. And the record stage was 20 feet. So it was 10 feet more. And granted, the records at that hydro station had only gone back to like I want to say 90s, maybe late 80s. So it wasn't like 100 years of records, right? Like we had downtown in the station in Asheville, the city. So it was one of those things that you had to put it in perspective and say, okay, there's only 35, 40 years of data. But to go more than 10 feet above what Ivan and Francis produced, that was my thing. It was like, look, Francis and Ivan, we all think that's the closest in memory we have. It's going to go 10 feet higher than that. And then I saw the data cut off. So that's when I was like, okay, did it actually, how far above that 30-foot level did it really get? I don't know if we'll ever really know. And then the data came back, once the system came online again. There were 63 total river stream gauges that surpassed the record levels.
Wow.
So something that was that's in the National Hurricane Center's official report on Helene.
Oh, there you go. You live through history.
I know. And I have a geologist friend, and he was like, it's weird, but you know how when they do layers of the earth and you can scale down and you can see when there were seismic things or monumental earth global activity and layer, he goes, this is a layer. This is a timestamp in history now. There's going to be that layer of silt and everything. That people are going to be like, well, why was that layer there? What happened? It was the Great Flood. It was all that.
I never thought about that aspect. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. It'll be a fingerprint in human history, and then it'll for the state, obviously the worst natural disaster. Obviously Florence was up to the date, the biggest natural disaster for our state. And who'd have thought we would be the ones to do it?
Well, Jason, thank you for taking the time to talk to me about this.